Good evening and welcome to this edition of the Hal Lindsey Report. Last week I reported on a new attack on the truth of the Bible. It's an upcoming conference of liberal Christian theologians and politicians and Palestinian Christians. In March, they're uniting in Bethlehem to right the alleged crimes and atrocities of Israel and their conservative political and Christian supporters. It's called Christ at the Checkpoint, and will feature mainly American ministers and theologians, some of whose names you might recognize. On last week's program, I addressed the problem presented by this group and similar ones that have convened in the past. But I'm so concerned about the impact this false teaching is having on many of our churches that I want to continue the discussion this week. Frankly stated, the theologians have perverted the prophetic scriptures, interpreted them allegorically so that they can make them fit their preconceived biases. In doing so, the politicians, theologians, and liberal media reveal one of two things. One, they have not taken the time to learn the true history of the development of the modern Middle East, especially from the time of the Ottoman Empire until the League of Nations Conference in San Remo in 1920 to 1922. Or two, they don't want to believe the true history of this era. In the light of this, I promise to give you more elaborate evidence of their error, which is theologically known, remember, as replacement theology. Also, I feel it necessary to define precisely a term that is now being used to criminalize those of us who do believe that the Bible is literally true. The true meaning of Christian Zionism is this. It is the belief that God will return the Jews to their ancestral homeland in the last days as he unconditionally promised. According to multiple promises and prophecies, which I will show in a moment, the Jews will be returned from their worldwide dispersion and reestablished as a nation in the land that God promised them through his covenants with the descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Most of us Zionists believe that this is the critical element in the last days prophetic scenario. I call the establishment of the State of Israel God's prophetic time clock. Its creation begins the final prophetic countdown to the end of the church age and the end of Gentile dominance as God's representatives on earth. Let's now examine what these liberal theologians of the church believe. Briefly put, they believe that the covenants of God made with the descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob were forfeited when they rejected Jesus as the Messiah and forced his execution. In their system, they believe that Israel has no place as a distinct people and a nation in God's future prophetic program. They believe the church has replaced the Israelites forever as God's chosen servants to represent him on earth, and that they have inherited the Jews' covenants. This system also teaches that virtually all prophecy in the Bible, such as Daniel, Ezekiel, and the book of Revelation, have already been fulfilled. The inevitable conclusion of this system of belief is that the present state of Israel and the Jewish people are impostors destined for destruction. It results in an anti-Semitic attitude toward the Israelites of today. Some even teach that there are no true descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob in the world today left. You know, Hitler would have loved this group. I vehemently denounce this doctrinal system, first and foremost, because if it were true, it would mean that the God of the Bible is a liar. God made certain unconditional promises to the descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Taken at face value by the same method of interpretation that Jesus used when he interpreted the Old Testament prophecies, these covenants are binding forever, despite the failings of the Israelites and the modern Israelis. The scholar, Dr. David L. Cooper, said about the kind of interpretation they use. When the Bible uses an allegory or a figure of speech, it is usually obvious. But when an interpreter arbitrarily takes a passage that is obviously intended to be a literal statement of fact and treats it as an allegory, he is twisting the Word of God and knowingly perverting its meaning. Let me show you some of these covenants God made with his people so that you can understand better. First, we're going to take the promises directed to Abraham and his descendants. This applies to his people. Number one, God said to Abraham in Genesis chapter 12, verses 2 through 3, I will make you into a great nation. 2, I will bless you. 3, I will make your name great. 4, and you will be a blessing. 5, I will bless those who bless you. 6, and whoever curses you, I will curse. 7, and all peoples on earth will be blessed through you. Now let's look at this clause by clause. First, God said to Abraham that he would make him a great nation. Now this inherently contains the promise of a son, since he had to have a son through which the nation would be created. It is also implicit in the statement that the covenant extends to that nation. And then in the second clause, God said he would bless Abraham personally. This was fulfilled, certainly. Listen, Abraham was protected through many perilous things in his time. He was blessed with vibrant health into old age. And everything he did, God prospered, even though many times he obviously didn't deserve it. Now the third clause, Abraham's name would be honored. Well, he's been honored over the whole world for over 4,000 years. And he's honored by being a part and being a foundational part of three of the world's largest religions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. And the fourth clause, Abraham has been the source of blessing for untold hundreds of millions. So when God said he would be a blessing, he certainly was. And the fifth clause, as God's representatives on earth, God knew the Jews would be objects of special attack. So God provided promises to bless those who would bless Israel. And then in the sixth clause, God promises that he will curse those who curse Israel. This part of the covenant was designed overall to protect Israel. And these are things that we as a nation need to carefully look at and be serious with. It becomes a real contest in our world today when you see it as I see it, between what the Bible teaches and what people just think on their own, or what false religions teach. Now in the seventh clause, God gives the true ultimate purpose of why he created this nation. As it says in the Hebrew, in your seed I will bless all the families of the earth. Ultimately, this was the whole purpose of God creating the nation of Israel. They were chosen and created to be a special representative for him. It was God's purpose to reach out through this nation to all the other nations of the world that were pushing God out of their cultures and memories. It is through Abraham's seed that God promised to bring the nations into a knowledge of his word and a relationship with him. The next covenant applies to the land. This covers the land covenant. You know, these promises give the Jews a title deed to a specific piece of property. And it also gives Abraham and his descendants the only title deed that is unconditional and forever. Think about this. Of all the people on earth, only Israel, the Israelites, the descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, have a title deed to the land given them by the Creator. All of us who live in every nation on earth, somewhere in the past, gained that land through the right of conquest. Here are some passages that spell out God's covenants concerning the land for his chosen people. First, the Lord said to Abram, after Lot had parted from him, lift up your eyes from where you are and look north and south, east and west. All the land that you see, I will give to you and your offspring forever. Now that's the promise of the land and how long their ownership of it would last. Forever.